At first, there's nothing in the CIA picture to suggest a boat. But look closely. You can see a huge dark shape sticking out of the ice cap. It's about 450 feet long, the right length for the Ark. The anomaly has tantalized Ark hunters since the pictures were released, but geologists remain unconvinced.
It's such a poor quality, grainy image that it's very hard to tell whether it's an ark or chicken entrails. You can see dark shapes anywhere from the air, be they in ice or on the ground. Some of them are ark-shaped, others are not. It's not at all convincing from one single poor quality photograph.
But hopes were raised again in the year 2000 with new pin-sharp satellite images of the strange shape. This one shows a snow ledge believed by Ark hunters to conceal a boat-shaped outline. But for Ian Plimer, this is just another of nature's random shapes.
Well, this is a fabulous photograph, far better resolution than the CIA photograph. However, we see nothing spectacular here. All we see is evidence of retreating and advancing ice.
In fact, all the geological evidence indicates that an Ark could not have remained frozen in a glacier for long.
The ice is constantly pushing material down the slopes of Mount Ararat and ultimately taken any ark that might have been there to the bottom. It would have spat it out as all glaciers do. As they move downslope, anything they pick up, they spit out, be it rocks, be it arks.
In addition to fragments of wood and photos, there are dozens of alleged sightings of the Ark. Biblical scholar Lloyd Bailey has made an exhaustive analysis of all the claims and found them to be false.
An amazing amount of evidence has been produced by Ark searchers in support of the Ark having landed there. But photographs are alleged to exist, but you can't find them. Newspaper articles of sightings are alleged to exist, but they are lost. Ark searchers want desperately to be able to support the Bible in an age of doubt, in the modern rational age. And that desire is so strong that they can rationalize away the overwhelming evidence that there is no boat there and no evidence whatsoever that there ever has been.
The traditional Noah story may not pass a rational historical test, but maybe it was never meant to. Biblical scholars, using clues in the language used by the Bible, are agreed that the story of Noah was physically written down in the 6th century BC. The scribes who wrote it were Jewish priests who were in exile in Babylon, today modern Iraq. Maybe they sat down one day to make up a cautionary tale about what happens when people disobey God. But it's said that all stories have some seeds of truth. Maybe the Noah story is an exaggeration, an embellishment of something that really happened. 150 years ago, archaeologists made some extraordinary finds in Iraq, evidence that would rewrite the famous story about Noah and his ark full of animals. In 1851, British archaeologist Sir Henry Layard explored the ruins of the Babylonian Library of Nineveh. His finds were a breakthrough. Hundreds of clay tablets of all sizes and shapes. They may have held vital clues about the Noah story. The trouble was, Sir Henry couldn't decipher the ancient Babylonian script. So he packed the tablets and sent them off to London to the British Museum to be deciphered by experts. The museum staff had no idea about the sensational information encrypted in the tablets. So they languished in their vaults for years until 1872, when they came to the attention of museum assistant George Smith. Dr. Irving Finkel today runs the department in the British Museum where George Smith worked.
Smith had a peculiar quality, tantamount to genius, which meant that he could look at a cuneiform tablet and know what it was about, more than anybody else before him and probably anybody else since. I mean, he wasn't a trained philologist. He knew a bit of Hebrew, he knew a bit of Arabic, he could look things up in the dictionary. But he just had this amazing quality that he could look at a bit of clay which to everybody else looks like a dog biscuit and know what the words meant. And he was the person in our department who read about the flood for the first time.
What George Smith discovered among the tablets was an ancient story about a great flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was a breakthrough Smith himself could barely comprehend.
The impact on him was something he could hardly control. He dropped the tablet back into the tray like this and started to run around the room holding his head and making funny noises, and according to the narrative which is recorded, he started even to take his clothes off in his agitation, because he was the first person after all that time to read this funny writing and see that there was, to all intents and purposes, the text that everybody knew from the Bible, and it was just too much for him to tolerate. He just nearly went crazy.
What seemed to upset him so much were the similarities between the stories of Gilgamesh and Noah. The great gods decided to make a deluge. Build a boat. Take into the boat the seed of all living things. Irving Finkel has a theory why George Smith behaved so oddly that fateful day. The sheer excitement might have triggered some sort of brain seizure.
I was reading something about the history of epilepsy where this phenomenon was described as a particular kind of epilepsy, making this funny noise and trying to disrobe yourself in the agitation of having an epileptic fit of some kind. And it did occur to me to wonder whether the shock that hit him, the real shock, might not have triggered something of that kind.
Since then, yet more accounts of the flood story were unearthed in Iraq, confirming that the story first emerged in ancient Mesopotamia, the place where the great Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian civilizations were born. The ancient flood stories had different names and were written at different times. But they all pointed to a common ancestor composed some 5,000 years ago. One original story about a disastrous flood.
It is very likely that the biblical story has a Mesopotamian prototype because they are so similar. In both cases, the gods decide to destroy the human race. They do so by a great flood. One family survives in a boat. They take on board animals. They disembark, and then they repopulate the earth.
One of the oldest flood narratives, the Epic of Atrahasis, written before the more famous Epic of Gilgamesh, was discovered only recently. Alan Millard found it while sifting through the British Museum's backlog of clay tablets. It made him wonder, perhaps the Bible never meant a global deluge.
The ancient Hebrew language has one word for land and country and earth, and it's easy to suppose that means the whole earth, but it certainly need not. And I think that it was a local flood that is described there.
The discovery of these older versions of Noah's story raised a tantalizing possibility. What if they had been inspired by an actual flood? Not a global deluge, but a